Thank you for joining us on Africa 24 for this exclusive interview session on the occasion of the 35th African Union Summit. Today we'll be receiving on set the Secretary General for the African Continental Free Trade Area, His Excellency Wamkele Mene. Thank you for joining us, Your Excellency.
Thank you for the invitation.
So the African Continental Free Trade Area has been operational since January 1st, 2021. What can you evaluate as progress made in this domain, especially in alleviating poverty across the continent?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me. Let me just first say that negotiating a trade agreement amongst 55 countries with different economic profiles, different trade profiles, is not easy. It takes time and it takes effort. However, we have been able to now agree on the main pillars of the agreement that will enable trade. We have established the legal foundation for enabling trade on our continent and for integrating our continent. This is a significant achievement. This in and of itself, convergence on different areas that will be covered by the trade agreement itself. In the last year, the ministers of trade have reached convergence, have agreed on 87.7% of rules of origin. So if you think about it, there are almost 60,000 products that are traded. Each region of Africa, each country has a different set of rules for local content rules, for local content requirements. Different regions have different rules of origin. That means that our trade across regions is constrained because we have different rules of origin. But now that we have 87.7% achievement in terms of agreement, that sets us in good stead to make sure that trade in Africa takes off on the basis of a single set of rules for trade and for investment. So I think the legal foundation, establishing the legal foundation in record time is in and of itself an achievement. What the ministers of trade directed last week when they met in Accra is that we must now develop the commercial part of the agreement and commercialize the agreement so that exporters can start to see the immediate benefits.
All right, sir. So taking into consideration the impact of the COVID-19 on African economies, in facts and figures, can you please give us the impact of this initiative on African economies so far?
Of the AFCFTA? Well, we know that the AFCFTA will boost intra-Africa trade significantly. We know that where the agreement is implemented effectively, we know that by the year 2035, we have an opportunity to contribute $450 billion to Africa's overall GDP. We have an opportunity to boost intra-Africa trade by up to 80% if we implement the agreement. And we have an opportunity to lift almost 100 million Africans out of poverty. It sets us, trade agreements are not, you don't see the results overnight. You set yourself up for the next 20 to 30 years. We know this from the experience of Europe, the European integration project. It took time. In the immediate challenge that we face, as you say, is COVID-19. How does the AFCFTA feature in the thought process, Africa's thought process about an immediate recovery? We know that cumulatively developed countries have given themselves close to $16 trillion in stimulus packages, almost $16 trillion, collectively, of course. Many African countries, in fact, there's not even a single African country that has the monetary policy space and the fiscal policy space for such large economic recovery tools. I've been saying this for some time now. The economic recovery tool for Africa is aggressive implementation of the AFCFTA. That's how we will contribute to boosting intra-Africa trade. That's how we will make sure that intra-Africa trade is the driver of economic recovery on our continent. And so there, again, there are short-term benefits that we can see in response to the challenges that have been presented by the pandemic.
All right, sir. So can you please give us some of the challenges faced by the African Union in facilitating trade in Africa, which stands at about 20%?
For the last 60 years, our continent has been trading more with Europe than amongst ourselves.
Sure.
Our trade patterns take us to Europe and some other parts of the world, but mainly we export to developed countries, to countries of the North. 60, 70 years down the line, we continue to export raw materials or primary commodities with no value addition, unprocessed. And so we continue to be trapped in what I call a colonial economic model, where value addition in Africa is very, very minimal, where manufacturing capacity is very shallow, productive capacity is very, very scarce across the continent relative to other parts of the world. And so the AFCFTA is about responding to this particular challenge and placing our continent on a path for and a trajectory for higher levels of industrialization by developing regional value chains, whether it is in automobiles, in agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, regional value chains that will enable us to leverage on this market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP as we speak today of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. So the long-term challenge, and that's why earlier I was saying trade agreements take time, the long-term challenge is how we dismantle this colonial economic model that we inherited and that in some cases we have to admit that we sustained ourselves without disconnecting from the global community, from the global economy, from global value chains, but dismantling this colonial economic model in a way that enables Africa to advance from an industrial development point of view, productive capacity point of view. That's what the AFCFTA is really all about.
All right, so as an institution working to promote African economic development, what strategies has the African Union put in place to reduce external dependence and to make the African Continental Free Trade Area a reality?
We have to start looking, as I was saying earlier, what value chains do we develop in Africa? Value chains that, as you correctly say, will reduce our reliance on others. Let's take pharmaceuticals, for example. In 2019, Africa imported almost $16 billion worth of pharmaceutical products from other parts of the world. We have been over-reliant on others for our own public health for many, many years. We now have an opportunity, and COVID-19 has pushed this to the fore. We now have an opportunity to leverage on the AFCFTA to manufacture much needed vaccines here on the African continent, to establish a generic drug industry here on the African continent. If we are able to reform and reconfigure our intellectual property rights regime as a continent, again, through the AFCFTA, we would be positioning ourselves for reducing reliance on others. We would be positioning ourselves for production of these much needed vaccines and generic drugs here on the African continent. And already we've started to see, for example, in Senegal. Senegal has a special economic zones that they are establishing on pharmaceuticals. Gabon has similar initiatives that they have started. What we need to do is to integrate that into a continental market, into value chains that will ensure that productive capacity, not only in pharmaceuticals, but in agro-processing, that it happens leveraging. It happens in Africa, leveraging on the AFCFTA. So
has the African Union fixed a budget to support the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area?
Yes, of course. We have our budget from member states, like any other organ of the African Union. We also are supported, I should say, and we are very grateful to be supported by our partners, African Bank, as well as the African Development Bank. These are key institutions in Africa, and of course they have an interest in ensuring that we boost intra-Africa trade. That's why they exist. In the case of African Bank and in the case of African Development Bank, in supporting regional economic integration on the African continent. So these are our main sources of funding for the moment.
Thank you for watching this interview. Stay tuned for more on Africa 24.